I'm going to go old school today. I'm going to use this thing. This is a paper Bible. This is an antique. And then I also have paper notes. It's crazy. But somebody forgot to charge their iPad yesterday. Anyways, my name is Eric, and I'm just glad you all are here with me. And we're just excited to see what God's doing and how he's working here through BNC. And it's just a privilege to get to sit back and see some of what he's doing that just we can't take credit for. So cool. And if you are new here, I'd love to meet you personally. If you're online, text that number so that we can make that connection. If you're here in person, then we can meet in the foyer afterwards. And I would love just the opportunity to put a name to a face and get to know you a little bit more. If you are new to the church, then this may be news to you, but we are walking through the New Testament this year as a church, and we're in a series right now called Letters to Leaders, because we're looking at Titus and Timothy, and today we're looking at Titus. And last week, I asked this question, are you a leader? And if you were here last week, then you know the answer to that question is what? Yes, you are a leader. Every single one of us is a leader because every single one of us will influence people in our lives, and leadership is influence. And today I want to ask you this question: who do you look up to? Last week was really about like who's looking up to you, that we kind of want to live lives that are exemplary, people look up to. But now the question is, who are you looking up to? Because there is no self-made man or woman. There are no self-made people. We all have people in our lives. And this is why Paul writes these letters. One of those things is to demonstrate the relationship that he has with these young proteges and how he's pouring into them. But he instructs them to do very similar kinds of things. And at the core of every single one of us is the need to have community, to need to have people who have gone before us, the need to have mentors and leaders and examples in our lives. And Paul really nails this in Titus chapter 2. So that's where we're going to go today. Titus chapter 2. We're going to read a few verses together. If you have your Bible, you can open it or turn it on. If not, it'll be behind me there and you can follow along. But it says this, Titus 2, verses 2 through 8. Teach the older men to be temperate, worthy of respect, self-controlled, and sound in faith, in love, and in endurance. Likewise, teach the older women to be reverent in the way that they live, not to be slanderers or addicted to much wine, but to teach what is good. Then they can urge the younger women to love their husbands and children, to be self-controlled and pure, to be busy at home, to be kind, and to be subject to their husbands, so that no one will malign the word of God. Similarly, encourage the young men to be self-controlled. In everything, set them an example by doing what is good. In your teaching, show integrity, seriousness, and soundness of speech that cannot be condemned, so that those who oppose you may be ashamed because they have nothing bad to say about us. Now, at first reading, I'm sure that especially some of you modern women in the house were a little offended. There's a little bit in there that we need to unpack and we will get to, but the core of what he's talking about is this: we need someone to show us the way. Everybody needs somebody to show us the way forward, the way around these things. And it's like this. I think of this. Has anyone ever traveled to a foreign country? A country that speaks a different language, right? Show of hands, you online, you can type it in the chat. What country did you go to? If you remember before COVID, we used to travel to other countries and like vacation there, and it was awesome. Or you would go and do mission trips. One time I was a youth pastor in Idaho, and we took a group of students. We drove from Boise, Idaho, down to Tecate, Mexico, and it was, that alone is just, it was a lot. But then we got down to Mexico, and we crossed the border into Mexico, and now I'm not that concerned for my life. Let's just be, I am more now because I have kids and stuff, but like to die on a missions trip, not that big of a deal to me, right? Like to die is gain. That's awesome. I get to be with Jesus. If you die on a missions trip, that's like a fast pass to heaven, right? And so, but now I have all of these teenagers and their parents do not want them to die on the missions trip, right? Like it's a big deal. It's funny, the whole way down, we'd have moments of prayer and every student is praying for, God, keep us safe, keep us safe, keep us safe. Because there are all these like, pretty much just all these white kids from Boise, Idaho going to Mexico, right? And so this is like the most cross-cultural experience they've ever had. And so I kept changing their prayers, like, God, help us take healthy risks. Help us take good risks. Help us, And so anyways, we get down to Mexico. We cross the border, and then we met with a guide, a local guide there who met us there at the border, walked us through the whole, like, immigration process. We did the right thing. We got our passports stamped. We did all of that kind of stuff. We walked through it. And then, because he was just, like, amazing, then he took us to this little street taco vendor. And like, I'm salivating now because I can remember it. If you've ever had street tacos in Mexico, you realize that what we have in America are bland little bits of chicken and tortillas for some reason. It was down there. It was amazing. Probably because they don't have an FDA. All the food was sitting out forever. It was amazing. It was so good, so good. So we went to this little he showed us this amazing little taco stand. And then he took us to this new place I'd never been before. Took us to and Eileen's going to correct me after this. I think it's a panaderia, there we go. It's like a Mexican bakery. So you walk through with a tray and you just load it up with like all these donuts and pastries and stuff. And this was like day one. So he knows all the hot spots. He takes us there. And he's giving us directions. Like I'm still driving our church van in Mexico and he's telling me where to go. And he's translating and he gets us, fed and happy, and then he gets us to the place that we're going to be doing all this missions work. For me, it would have been really, really stressful to figure that out by myself, right? Like, as soon as we hit the border, I felt the stress increase. But as soon as he jumped into the passenger seat of our car, it was like the pressure was off. I had a little bit more peace because somebody knew the lay of the land. Because it wasn't new for him. He had been there before. He lived there. That was his place. It was normal. It's like when somebody comes here and you show them around Seattle and you show them how to navigate traffic and you show them all kinds of things. It's not odd for you. You've been here. You've lived here. You know it. And this is what we need to understand is that, we all need those kinds of people in our lives. It's true of literally traveling and needing a guide, but the rest of life, we need some guides in our lives. People who've been there before, people who know the lay of the land. It's not new for them. They've navigated this before. And this is what I want us to understand. If you want to go further in your faith, find someone who is further in their faith. Find somebody who's further along. And in fact, if you just simply take faith out of it, I'll just tell you, I'll let you in on a secret. If you're maybe not a follower of Jesus yet, or you're exploring this principle just works. It just works no matter what. If you want to go farther in your career, find somebody who's farther in their career than you are. If you've just graduated from college and you're just getting started, find somebody who's down the road ahead of you and who's willing to invest in you. Because then you're going to go a lot farther than you could on your own. If you're here and you're new and you're newly wed, you're newly married, or you're new to relationship in that context, find some people who've done it pretty well for like the last 4 decades. Those are the people that you want to talk to. Problem is, young couples, we like to talk to our other young couple friends, and we're all like, I don't know what I'm doing. And they're like, we don't know what we're doing either. Awesome, right? And then you go to this couple who's been married for 50 years, and you go, hey, how does this work? And they pour out wisdom on you. Somebody who's parented, if you're having kids and you've never had kids before, there's an incredible resource in other parents who've raised kids who made it like healthily through their lives. If you want to go further, find someone who's already further. Because for them, it's not new ground. For them, it's territory they've walked through before. This works with everything: relationships, career, parenting, all of this. Now listen, young people, there is a lie that you have been sold. And the lie is this: the world is so new and everything is so different that no one knows what you're going through. No one has walked through what you've walked through before. This is totally unique. It's one of the worst lies the enemy will tell us, is that we are alone. No one knows. No one has walked through grief like you have. No one has walked through depression like you have. No one has walked through loss and pain like you have. No one has walked through it. And that's a lie, because human nature is the same. The reason that you're feeling that may be new, may be different, but how you feel that is the same. It's just the same. Like, that's the lie that we've been told. And older people, you've been sold a lie that because things are so new, you don't have anything to offer anymore. You've been sold this lie that the younger generation is the ones who know how to navigate culture and they're tech savvy and they don't seem to need me anymore, and I'm kind of aging out of this influence. And it's not true. We need you. We need each other. The truth is, really healthy churches are multi-generational. Really healthy churches have everybody from birth all the way through to their hundreds, right? That is the key to really healthy churches. Why? Because that's the only way that we can do this. The only way we can have examples who've gone ahead of us is if there are people who are older than us in the church. The only way that you can invest if you're older into a younger person, if that younger person is in the church with you. Really, this is how it works. Healthy churches are multi-generational, but you see one of two things happening a lot. You see churches that are too old, and they have tons of maturity. They're filled with people who have followed Jesus for 50 years, 60 years, incredible. But they don't have young, and they don't have a lot of energy. And their lifespan is short. And we see that happening. Their church is closing every single day because they haven't reproduced themselves in the next generation. But on the flip side, there are churches that are too young. There are churches that are attracting all these really cool, young, hip people, but they have tons of energy, but not a lot of maturity. And those are short-lived too. Because eventually, we need to have maturity grow in us. So the ideal, the core, the ideal, and what I love that I can even see with my eyes today is that multi-generational method. And in Titus 2, this is what Paul shows us. He shows us this ideal of the generations working together, because when Jesus came 2,000 years ago, he did do something new. He did something radical. He changed everything. See, he went out and he gathered together all these young guys, these young people. We call them the apostles or the disciples. He invited them to live with him. He taught them for 3 years. He mentored them. He went on travels with them. He did everything. He poured himself and invested into them. And then he sacrificed himself, gave his life on the cross. That was the end of his mission. And then he rose again from the grave and ascended back to the Father and left that mission in his disciples' hands. And he started something brand new that had never existed on earth before. The idea that God does not do new things, that there's nothing new under the sun, is really not true. God does new things all the time. Behold, I'm making all things new. This is what God says. So he does this brand new thing called the church. And the church is this new community of people where every single dividing barrier of culture is broken down. So you can be of different ethnicities and be a part of the church. That's radical when Jesus came. No one was saying that. Right? Jew, Gentile, every ethnicity is broken down. And the gender barrier is broken down. We're now equals and equivalents in this, which it was an incredibly male-dominated society back then. And so you have that. You have socioeconomic barriers breaking down. You have slaves and slave owners who go to church together and are mutual love and respect and are peers now. You have the same thing happen in the generations. This multi-generational thing happening together. This is the way that Jesus dreamed it. And the ideal is that the generations don't work against each other, that the generations work for each other. The generations love one another. They appreciate and respect each other. Now, very clearly, this was not happening in Crete. This is where Titus is doing his ministry, is in this place called Crete. It's an island just kind of off the coast of Greece. And Crete had a really bad reputation in the Roman world. In fact, the Romans coined a phrase for lying called to Cretize, right? So, and in fact, it's actually carried over into our language a little bit. If somebody calls you a Cretan, are you being complimented or are you being insulted? Right? This is where this comes from. The Cretans were not known for being really good. They had this horrible reputation. In fact, in today's Bible reading, we read Titus chapter 1, and Paul quotes this prophet or this poet, and he says, all Cretans are liars and evil and lazy and gluttons. And that quote is true. This is what Paul says. Right? I'm like, this is how you reach the community, like insulting everybody? But they had this horrible, horrible reputation. And the church there is struggling because this is the society around them. They prized lying and cheating and all these kinds of different things. And they have both bad teaching and they have really bad behavior at the same time. It's a rough place. And so Paul gives these instructions to correct problems. Paul gives us Titus chapter 2, 2 through 8 to correct issues that were going on. First, he addresses these older men in verse 2. Now, I'm going to leave it up to you to decide if you're an older man in the house today or online. If you're an older man, it's up to you. Probably it's like 40s or 50s plus, somewhere in that range. So if you're in your 40s, you can say, it's probably 50s plus. If you're not, it's fine. But he says this. He says, older men should be right, temperate and worthy of respect, self-controlled, sound in faith, sound in love, sound in endurance. And so all of these things, these are all these like really observable traits. All these traits that other people can see, other people can witness. If you are worthy of respect, that is what other people think of you, right? It's a very clear thing. If you are temperate, people can see that. They can witness that. They can witness if you are sound in faith. They may not, self-control may be a little bit of a struggle, but you could usually tell somebody who's self-controlled versus not. But self-control is a tricky one because you don't know what I wanted to do. You just know what I actually did do, right? But you can usually tell sound in faith, sound in love, which is not the feeling of love, but the way that you act. Sound in endurance. All these observable virtues that inspire the faith of others, especially the younger guys, especially the younger men, older men in this house, older men here. We need people like this, younger people like me. I'm definitely putting myself in that category because I'm not close to 40 yet, right? So I'm still there. Younger men, we need the example of men who have followed Jesus for years, loved their wives, loved their kids, been faithful to that, because we have a lot of really different bad examples of the other. I can look, and that's the one the news picks up, right? The news picks up all the stories of the guys who got it wrong, the old guys who messed up, right? The pastors who turns out had the secret life. But there are a ton of others who have been faithful and been incredible and lived their lives with integrity and been temperate and worthy of respect and self-controlled. It's just the news doesn't like to report on those guys. But that's what we need. That's what the healthy church needs, that example from you older men. And then he goes on to talk about the older women. And I'm sorry, older women, same thing, 40s plus, 50s plus. And Paul is not necessarily kind to the older women in this scenario, because the older women were falling into this stereotype. So he tells them to be reverent. He tells them not to be slanderous, not to be drunk on much wine, not to be drunkards, basically, and to teach what is good. So there's this really clear stereotype that Paul is contradicting here, because the stereotype of an older Roman woman was an older Roman woman who was often, most of the time, drunk, and that drunkenness led to slander. And so he's saying, don't be like the world is. Don't fall into that stereotype. Don't live up to the stereotype. Live up to the redeemed life that Jesus has birthed inside of you. And so Paul is responding to a really clear problem, a specific problem that he sees. Again, you don't have to tell people not to be drunk if they're not being drunk, right? This is the challenge with these letters, is that we only have one side of the conversation. So we kind of fill in the gaps. But there's this clear expectation that they live up to this new standard of life. They had no problem living up to the stereotype of the Cretan, Roman, older woman. And now Paul's saying, no, there's a different way that you can live. And he makes it so clear. In verse 3, he makes it super clear. You're supposed to pass this on to the younger women. This is why you do this. Why do you live in this way? Why should you do this? Well, one of the reasons is to pass it on to younger women. And again, in verse 4 through 5, we see the instructions to younger women, and it's again a little offensive to our modern day ears, because Paul is dealing with some really specific problems in this church, right? So he says, love your husbands and kids, be self-controlled, be pure, be busy at home, be kind, be submitted to their husbands. And there's that S word nobody likes, right? Oh, submission. So what he's doing is he's presenting these virtues that are in direct contrast to what is actually happening in the world. Essentially what he's saying is this: don't cheat on your husband and neglect your kids. Does anyone think that's a problem? Are we offended by that? Hey, you married women, you shouldn't go have sex with other men. And you should take care of your kids. Are we all good? We're not offended anymore, I hope. And that's essentially what he's saying, because there's this new woman in Roman culture who is doing all this, the new liberated Roman woman who can go out and do all these things and is neglecting their home, neglecting their family, and instead of loving and serving and protecting their family, they're exposing their family to an immense amount of risk. Because this is the way that Roman society worked back then. It was centered on the household, and the woman played a significant role in running the Roman household. And when she left, there was no one to fulfill that role, and that means now the family is open and exposed to problems. And so whenever we read stuff like this, and you might read stuff that kind of goes like, it offends you. And look, every time we read the New Testament or the Old Testament, there's stuff that offends us. A lot of times it's because we have a problem, not because the Bible has a problem. But you also go to balance it with the rest of the New Testament. The teaching in the rest of the New Testament is mutual submission between husband and wife, love and respect. And in fact, in most cases, the husband is given a harder responsibility than the wife is. Because the husband is told to love their wives like Jesus loved the church, and Jesus sacrificed his life for the church. So it's kind of a big deal. So again, we're dealing with a really specific problem here, not like a general principle. And so then he moves on to the younger men in verses 7 through 8. He says, be self-controlled, show integrity, seriousness, soundness of speech. And in this one, he links in Titus, because Titus is in this category. And he's saying, Titus, this is the way that you now live as an example to these younger men. And really, there's actually like a really bad verse break. See, when this was written, there weren't like chapters and verses and periods and stuff. It was just like all these run-on sentences. And they put this, in my opinion, a bad verse break because it says, if you read that, can you put that up there for me, Daniel? I think it's verse 7. Awesome. It says, be self-controlled, period. Sorry, go back. Oh, yeah, that's right. No, I think that's not right. Anyways, it's okay. Here, I'll just pull it open in mine. Basically, what he's saying is be self-controlled in everything. That's where the period should be. And then it should say, set them an example. So that's the way it should be. So really, he's setting up self-control as the core responsibility, the core virtue of young men. And if you've met any young men, you understand why Paul is saying this, right? Young men are unfortunately not known for self-control. We are known for doing dumb things and not thinking about the consequences of them. Right? And young men in the house are being real quiet right now. I'm not sure why. But we're a lot more about like immediate gratification and don't think through the consequences of our action. I don't know if you know this, but physiologically, women mature first before men, which is why women marry older men who are at the same like level of maturity. You know, I don't know what happened with us. My wife married me and I was younger. I guess I was just that much more mature, right? So, and everyone knows that's just not the case, right? So basically he's saying this, right? Be self-controlled, show integrity. This is the whole core. And the real summary of all of this teaching is this. The older should be an example to the younger. And the younger should remain teachable, humble, and listen to the older. And when this works, it is amazing. When this works and it's in effect, it's incredible. It changes cultures. But when it doesn't work, it is devastating. It's horrible. It destroys things. Now, today, I would argue that we still live in kind of a more imperfect society. The question is, do we live in a more perfect place, or are we more like the country of Crete or the island of Crete? In some ways, it's kind of both, right? But too often, it feels like this to me. It feels like there's a battle between generations. And I remember feeling that when I was a young person in church. I would feel this tension. And I remember I took our teenagers to a camp one time, and this camp speaker was just really like hammering the generation, all the things that are wrong with them. And we have the time of small groups together after that, and we go to unpack, hey, what did God speak to you in the service, and all these things. And one of the teenagers said, this guy really hates us, doesn't he? I was like, oh, that is not good. And I remember feeling this, like I was a drummer as a kid, and I'm like, well, I still am, but I just do this now instead of play the drums. And I remember like our youth, we'd have like youth group people come and do worship, and like we'd get on the stage and we were like excited, we're going to worship God and use our gifts, and I'd get on and play the drums, and the old people would hate it and would like visibly make it clear that they did not want to hear it. They would go, and close their ears and like, you know. So I was like, man, the older generation hates me. And unfortunately, a lot of young people feel like this. Now, young people, the older generation probably thinks the same of you. that you hate them, that you're not interested in their stuff, right? Because you're trying to change their church. So often it feels like there's this battle between generations. We have an older generation, and some of them are amazing examples, and some of them are awesome and love Jesus, have been incredible, but some of them aren't good examples, and some of them have made us feel awful as young people. And a lot of times the older generation will resent the younger generation for trying to change their church, right? And if you've heard me say it once, I hope you've heard me say it before. This is not your church, and it's not my church. This is Jesus' church. So no one can change your church because it's not yours. This is Jesus' church. This is what we're after. Now, on the flip side, the younger people, we tend to be rebellious and unteachable, right? And we resent the older people for resisting change. We go like, why do you want to keep singing these old hymns? Why are you so interested in all these things? And so there's this mutual challenge that we are experiencing together. And when each generation fights for their own rights, fights for what they want, everyone loses. It's just what happens. Everyone loses. But when they work together, when we love and serve together one another, everybody can win. So to the older generation, let me speak to you just for a minute. And younger, I'm going to get to you, and it'll be your turn to be offended, okay? Wow, this is like, I'm actually offending you. You're all quiet. Okay. Sorry. The older, listen, you have so much to offer. To the older generation, if no one has said this to you recently, let me say it really clearly. We need you. Especially the younger people who don't realize it yet, we need you. Because what you have is something that we do not have. You have experience that we do not have. Some of you have followed Jesus for longer than I have been alive. You know what it takes to be faithful over the years. You know what it takes to love your wife or to love your husband over decades. You know what it takes to follow Jesus in a difficult place. You have a lifetime of consistency and faithfulness. And younger people, we just simply don't because we haven't lived long enough yet. We need you. We need that example. And listen, it is not time for the older generation to sit back and retire and let the younger generation take over. We need you to still be in the game. We need you to still be here. It's time for you to invest in the younger. In fact, this is what I would argue. Biblically, I would argue this, that biblically the responsibility to pass on faith falls on the older generation, not the younger generation. And we know this, the stats on young people following Jesus are not good. And a lot of times what I see is, well, young people are just not interested anymore. And we actually try to blame the younger generation for them not following Jesus, when biblically the responsibility to pass on faith falls on the older generation. It goes all the way back to Deuteronomy, the Shema, impress these things on your children and your children's children. And so when the church dies because the older generation dies out and it never reproduced itself in the younger, it's not the younger generation's fault. This is just the biblical principle that we have to have people who know it pass it on to us. We're just simply dependent on that. That's how kids learn. Kids learn from example. We need somebody to teach us the example of what it means. And so one of the best things that you could do if you're here and you're in that retirement age is not to just kick back and sit back and relax and try to coast the rest of your life. Get involved. Invest in our kids. Invest in our young people. Invest in our teenagers. We need your help to win back my peers to Jesus. Listen, we need you. We need your help. Now, younger people, let me speak to you for a minute. You as well have so much to offer, and we need you too, because you have something that the older generation doesn't have. You have years and years and years ahead of you. You have an incredible potential for impact. In fact, the younger generation, millennials and below, you have the potential for impact that the older generation could only have ever dreamed of. The amount of access that you have to the world, the amount of influence that you can have by just simply having the right app on your phone, the amount of opportunity that we have, that younger people have, is absolutely unprecedented. It is incredible. In my opinion, I think this, if this younger generation, if millennials, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, if we really get a hold of the gospel, we can be the ones who complete the Great Commission, who truly take the gospel to the ends of the world, because that is the kind of access and availability that we have today. But the only way that we are going to do that, the only way that we're going to make the distance is if we have the character to sustain us beyond those years. And in order for us to gain that kind of character, it means you need some experience. You need some time. You need some people in your life who can tell you no. You need some people in your life who can call out the sin in you, who can call out the mistake in you, who can build that character and that foundation in you. Listen, young people, we love to hang out with our peers because they encourage us. But we need mentors because mentors challenge us. Mentors will challenge us and call out things in us that we would not otherwise see. It's painful. It hurts. I know, man. I have mentors in my life who call out stuff and who've called out some things, and I go, man, like, this is painful. I don't like this, but they were right, and it caused me to grow. So young people, we need you to do what the older generation can't do. We need you to take the gospel around the world and to reach lost people and to speak the language of culture, to understand those trends. But you need a foundation to build all that on, or it'll come crumbling down. Peers encourage us, mentors challenge us, and most of us live in the middle. Most of us, like if you're my age or around that, you're in the middle somewhere. I have people who are mentoring me that I'm listening to, that I'm growing from, but I have people underneath me that I'm investing in as well. Most of us are in that place somewhere. And if you want to go further in your faith, find someone who's further in their faith. Now, there's some really bad news that as we look at our church culture and life today in the U.S., there's some really good news too. And you may never have heard some of this, so I want to just share this with you. Some of the bad news is this. We understand the dropout rate in church is bad, right? Some have estimated upwards of 75% of kids raised in church will leave after high school graduation. That's not good. I don't think anyone thinks that's good. That's a problem. We have to address that, right? Here's some other really good news, though. And you may not realize this. Some really good news. Millennials, Gen Z, younger people love older people. They actually really like and want to spend time with the older generation. Now, some of you here who are boomers, that doesn't make sense to you. Or maybe Gen X, that doesn't make sense to you either. Because when you were a teenager, you didn't want to spend time with older people. But things have shifted and things have changed, and that's a whole nother study on why those things have changed, but it simply has. You may not realize it, older generation, but teenagers, 20-somethings, 30-somethings, we look up to you. We love you. We want to spend time with you. So the question is this for you who are older in the house. Who are you investing in right now? Who are you taking out to lunch and giving encouragement? Who in your life is a generation below you that you are loving and pouring into and encouraging and cheering on? Because those younger people, they need you. We need you. And the younger people here, who are you learning from? Who are those mentors in your life? Do you have somebody in your life who's a generation above you, who is allowed to speak things into your life, who is allowed to tell you no, who is allowed to challenge you? Because we need both, right? We need both, and that's what it looks like when the church works together in harmony and the generations work together in harmony. You know why? Because who cares what songs we sing? There's a world around us that's going to hell. There's a world around us that is lost and is broken and doesn't need us to fight about what the color of the chairs are or what songs we sing or or whether we print announcements or put them in an email. What the world needs is a unified church who loves and serves one another and loves and serves the community so well that they want to be a part of it too. And like I said, if you're here and you're maybe not following Jesus or you're exploring faith, let me just say this. The principle works. Biblical principles, they work. It's just, that's the way that God founded them. So if you find somebody who's farther along in you in any of these categories, it will help, but it won't work with faith. The only way that it works with faith is if you find somebody who's been faithful and centered their life on Jesus. Because why? Because Jesus is the only one who's perfect. Jesus is the only one. Look, a mentor in your life, as good as they could be, they'll probably disappoint you at one time or other. They may make a mistake or two because they are imperfect, and only Jesus is perfect. And so what you need to look for in a mentor, if you're here and you're young and you're maybe even not following Jesus, is somebody who follows Jesus and who has for decades. Because only Jesus can do this radical transformation in our life. Only Jesus has paid for our sin. Only Jesus has gone to the cross, paid for our sins, rose again from the grave. So today, you may need a mentor, but what we really, truly need is Jesus. So church, would you stand to your feet across this place? We're going to sing one more time. We're going to center our hearts on Jesus. And I want to challenge you to do one thing today before you leave. One really practical, easy, I hope, thing for you to do today. Before you step foot out these doors, and you who are online, you can apply this in your own way. But before you leave, talk to somebody who's of a different generation than you are. Cross the generational divide. Because we have a tendency to just stick in our kind of like tribes. So before you leave, speak to someone who's of a different generation than you are. Jesus, we look to you because you are the source of hope. You are the one who came and lived and died and rose again. You are the perfect example that we need. And Jesus, our desire is to be your church. Our desire is to be the church that you birthed, that you died for. And your church is multi-ethnic. Your church is multi-generational. Your church is multi-economic, God. Help us to be the church that you've called us to be. Not to be energetic but shallow, and not to be mature but not energetic, God, but to be a church where every generation is represented, is valued, and finds their place in your mission. And Jesus, I pray, even right now, just prophesy over people. I pray that we would see 60, 70-year-olds become youth leaders and children's leaders in this church, God. I pray that we would see 20-somethings reach out to 50, 60-year-olds for mentorship. And I pray that, Jesus, that we would love and respect each other more than ever before. And let us be the ideal that you've called us to, God, so that every one of us can finish the race that you've set out for us, God, so that every one of us has the character and the endurance to make it the distance in this thing called faith, and so that we can win back all of my peers, my friends, my family who are not following you anymore because they were disenfranchised by the church, Jesus. But help us to be the church that wins the lost, that builds deeply mature disciples, God, and ultimately sees your will be done. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Come on, church, if you believe.